Well, okay, everybody, it's 6:05. I am so glad that you all are here. My name is Blake Kimsey. I'm the Executive Director of Writing Workshops Dallas, and I just get to introduce Alex Temblador tonight. She had this idea for this great quarterly panel series that we're all here for, LitTalk. I think this is our fourth, right, Alex? This is our
Yeah.
fourth, something like that. It's been a lot of fun. And of course, excuse me, we were doing this in store at Interabang, which we just love partnering with them for this, providing books. And we love our independent bookstores here in Dallas. We've got three great ones. We've got Deep Vellum, we've got Wild Detectives, and Interabang Books. And so we've loved partnering with them for this series. And we're really happy that you are here tonight. We're going to have a great conversation on the rise of the young adult book tonight. And leading our discussion is going to be Alex Temblador, who is the award-winning author of the novel Secrets of the Casa Rosada and a forthcoming novel called Half Outlaw. It's a magical realism novel forthcoming from Blackstone Publishing in 2022. Alex received her MFA in creative writing from the University of Central Oklahoma, and she's since been a freelance writer for the last 5 years. And she writes everything. She goes everywhere. She writes everything. She kind of is like a Swiss Army knife when it comes to writing, because she writes pretty much across all genres. So happy that Alex created this series, LitTalk. Very excited about the discussion tonight. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Alex. Thanks so much.
Thanks. I really appreciate it, Blake. I'm really glad to be here tonight. This is our second time that we've done it over Zoom because of the pandemic, but I'm really glad that we're able to have this conversation and showcase these amazing authors with people from beyond Dallas and Fort Worth, and showcase that Dallas and Fort Worth does have a phenomenal selection of authors. I was just going through some authors today and noting that there's a ton more that I still need to get on these panels, so I'm excited for future ones. So before we begin, I really would like, if I can get each and every one of you to, Mike, Samantha, and Hafsah, to give us a little bit of intro about yourself, tell us a little bit about your books, and kind of how you got into writing. Do you want to start, Mike?
Sure, glad to. I am MichaelMorrison. My friends call me Mike. I'm in the North Dallas area, arguably probably the oldest dude on this panel. And I'm used to that. I came to writing a little later in life. I actually started writing as a elementary school kid, and in middle school, I discovered science fiction and fantasy, and that kind of became my go-to read, and I started to write stories. As I got older, I wish I had $1 for every story that I started to write and I didn't finish. And I went to seminary and I got married and I had a kid and life happens, and I would start these stories and just lay them aside. And it wasn't until I was in my mid-40s, my daughter was a teenager at the time, and she really inspired me to really dig in and write seriously. I started writing Hannah Goodheart and the Guardian of Time, which is published by Fox Press, got published October of last year. I have a second in that series coming out. We don't have a release date yet, but and then there's a short that'll be released limited to ebooks sometime here in early 2021, I think. But yeah, so I came to this late in life, and glad to glad to be able to pursue this lifelong dream.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. Samantha, do you want to go next?
Sure. So my name is Samantha Mabry, and I am here in East Dallas. And I got started, I don't want to say that, and not, this is going to sound tacky. I was going to be not as late as Mike, but like later, like I didn't write stories when I was a kid. I was an English major, and I loved other books and never ever felt like I was qualified to write the kind of books that I loved. Like it was just completely, I just couldn't have fathomed it. And so it wasn't until graduate school when I took a class on creative nonfiction and like essay writing. And I thought that maybe I could do that, but I couldn't. But I tried. So that was sort of the first place where I tried. And then after school, I just started sort of reading things that I had always wanted to read, but never could, like a lot of Wilkie Collins and Charles Dickens. And like my sort of sentimental favorite book is always like Dracula. I've like read that multiple times. And then I started reading like The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende, and just like a bunch of things that I had never really had the chance, not that weren't really assigned. And so I did kind of land with magical realism because I understood it. It was the only kind of storytelling that I did kind of feel qualified to write at the time, because I did understand about these kinds of families. It was like multi-generational, in my case, like Mexican American families. My mom is Mexican American, my dad is half Puerto Rican, and I just kind of landed with those stories. And so my first novel was A Fierce and Subtle Poison, and it was set in San Juan, Puerto Rico. It came out in the spring of 2016, which feels like 3 decades ago at this point. But then my second novel is called All the Wind in the World. It came out in the fall of 2017. And my third novel is called Tigers Not Daughters, and it came out in March. Yeah.
Yay. Thank you. I totally agree with you on magical realism, and that being the story that the type of writing you understand.
Yeah.
Hafsah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I am Hafsah Faizal, and I'm the author of We Hunt the Flame. It released, what's the cover? It released May 2019, which, yeah, kind of feels like a decade ago now. It's the first in a duology set in a world inspired by ancient Arabia. So my story kind of mashes up both of yours because as a kid, I did not like reading, and so I didn't like writing either. It wasn't until I was a teenager that I was just like really bored and really lonely, and my dad took me to the library down here in Arlington, where I am located now, that I started reading again. I picked up my first YA, and it was a fantasy, and I just couldn't stop reading at that point, and it led me to blogging about books, and then to basing my business in the world of publishing, because I am a web designer for authors. And then eventually at 17, after I'd read all these books, I thought I had this like really weird dream. So I thought, why don't I make a book out of it? And so I wrote that, and with a lot of bravado that I don't have now, I queried it and tried to get it published. So I also had this like, and of course that didn't work out. And I thought my goal is to get published by 20, or I'm gonna give this dream up and I'll just stick with designing, and I'll still be in the publishing world, but no more writing. So the book actually came out a lot later when I was 26. But yeah, it's the first book, and the second is We Free the Stars, and that releases on January 19th of 2021. It's the direct sequel to the book, which, well, let me tell you a bit about We Hunt the Flame. It's a sweeping fantasy set in a world inspired by ancient Arabia, where a girl named Zafira ventures on this quest to an island where she has to retrieve a lost artifact that can save her dying world. And we have the second protagonist, who is an assassin known as the Prince of Death, who is sent on a similar mission to find Zafira on the island, kill her off, and steal the artifact for his father. But when they meet up on the island, they discover an ancient evil that's brewing that they have to join forces to defeat.
Nice. Thank you so much for those 3 intros. So we're all, including me, I'm also a young adult author. So we're all 4 young adult authors. What drove you to write in the YA genre? Because you could have written in any genre. You could have written for adults or romance or fantasy, but you focused on YA. Who wants to answer that first?
I can go first this time.
Okay.
Okay, so like I said, I started reading YA, and then that was all I read, and I was just in that space. And when I started writing Beyond the Flame, I was 19, so I was still a teen, so I was like, that made the most sense to me. But as I started getting this question more at panels, it made me realize that the reason why I was so drawn to YA, even as a teen and even now as a younger adult, there's so much rawness, and that time is just such a pivotal time in our lives that we're always reflecting back to it, because there are so many questions and so many obstacles in our way, and there's just so much that when you make one decision, it can lead to so many other things, and that's just such a great space to keep exploring continuously. Like, you can't get tired of it.
I like that. Good answer.
Yeah, I think that when I was starting to read a lot of YA too before I wrote it, and it does just, it's like the age group where things happen. Like, people were writing really interesting books and all kinds of different books. Like, it just seemed like where you could be allowed to write all kinds of things. I know that a really pivotal YA book for me was called Imaginary Girls by Nova Rinsuma, and I was just like, this is amazing. Like, this was unlike any book I'd ever read, and the fact that it was YA, which made me really kind of rethink the category, and that there was a lot possible in it. And I was really drawn to trying to write books that I would have possibly wanted to read when I was younger, because the category didn't exist. Maybe it did. It did in like Anne of Green Gables and like Black Beauty or something, like those juvenilia is what it used to be like shelved under. And, but, I remember just I was an only child. I was real, I loved like rock music. I was real moody, and I wanted something to like seriously reflect what I was going through, and not like in a kind of it'll be okay kind of way, or if you find the right friends, everything will just be great kind of way. And so I did try to want to write to like validate young women's emotions, in a really true way. Like, you can be angry, and the story arc does not have to be that you become happy, And so I did want to not write sort of escapist books, but write books that I felt was actually reflective of being a teenager, and thus maybe a teen would pick it up and find comfort in that, like a shared experience, basically.
I like that. Mike, before you answer, I actually did have a question that's similar to this, but specifically for you. Your main character is 12 turning 13.
Yeah.
So you kind of fall in this like in between middle grade and YA.
Yeah.
Can you share why this age for your protagonist was important for you to write, and what that means for a story?
Sure. And that's kind of an interesting story in itself. When I originally wrote the manuscript for Hannah Goodheart, I wrote it third person, and she and her friends were all around that 13-year-old range. And at the time, that was about the age that my daughter was at when I started writing this. And I remember even going back into my own life, that was such a pivotal age for me. That was kind of this awakening period for me in my life. And I saw my daughter kind of going through that same discovery of who she is. She's no longer a little girl. She's not yet quite a woman. And so she's kind of discovering, and I experienced the same thing as a 12, 13-year-old. And even though Hannah Goodheart is shelved YA, I've had educators who are middle school, junior high educators say this is great for middle grade readers. The challenge for me was writing it third person. When I submitted it to Fox Press and they accepted it, they said, we'd like to see a couple chapters written from a first person POV. And I got to be honest, it's like 1 second, dream come true, I'm going to get published. But then there's this caveat, and I'm thinking to myself, I got it and now I'm going to lose it just that fast, because I am not a 13-year-old girl. That is my main character. So how am I going to do this? So I tapped into my own experience, but then I pulled my daughter in a lot, and that was a real gift for me to be able to go to her and say, so what are you thinking? What are you feeling? What do you, and have her really kind of put me in that frame of mind. But it was a challenge, to say the least. But nevertheless, I wanted to write something for my daughter's generation that just basically said, character counts. And kind of at the heart of the story is a 13-year-old girl who's seemingly taking on this responsibility of fixing something that's not her fault. So there's a message there that the world is a mess, and that generation is inheriting a mess. And even though it's not their fault, somebody's got to take responsibility and try to do something to affect some change. And so that's definitely a prevailing theme in the book. But like the rest of the panel, Hafsah and Samantha, I write what I like to read. And as I mentioned, I was a middle schooler when one of my teachers actually handed me a copy of A Wrinkle in Time. YA didn't exist, back in the 70s and 80s. And so it was A Wrinkle in Time, and it really opened my love for reading. From there, I went to Tolkien. I went to C.S. Lewis. As the genre opened up, and I certainly read the classics, Verne and Wells and so on. But I really fell in love with reading, so I like to tell stories based in the worlds that I enjoy reading about.
And I think that like something that like all three of us are kind of getting at is that, if you're writing for young people, you have faith in them. Like you believe that they can change the world,
Totally.
That you can put responsibility into their hands and they will do something great with it.
Yeah, totally.
I love that. Yeah. Hafsah, so your novel, We Hunt the Flame, it explores kind of the expectations of gender and often the breaking of those gender norms, I guess I would say. Like Zafira disguises herself as a man, Nasir is pressured not to be compassionate. Why is it important for YA books to explore these gender norms and gender expectations of, young adults today? And how did you kind of go about that in your book?
Well, it started unintentionally because I told myself I was just going to write an adventure, and I'm not going to tackle anything. But I guess that's kind of a lie we tell ourselves sometimes, and subconsciously all of this got woven in. And I think it was because, despite all the progress we've made in recent years, along the way in all these years, it's still the same, but it's masked in different ways. And as we discussed, like if we're going to hand the world over to the next generation, they need to understand, and sometimes they're not taught by their parents, and sometimes they need to experience it in other ways. And when it's packaged in a way that isn't like, here, education for you to understand and for you to learn, sometimes when you're like, learn this, it's not as appealing. And so when you have it set out as an example, and it's like, this is a story and this is what this girl is doing despite all of that her people are saying she can't, and then there's this boy who is set to inherit a kingdom, and compassion is something he needs despite what his autocratic father tells him. So yeah, I guess I didn't put it in consciously, but as I started realizing this was in the book, I needed it to shine more because it was a message that was so important.
I love that. And so you just kind of worked it once you realized it was in there and expanded on it.
Yeah, that's basically it.
Cool. Samantha, so your new book, Tigers Not Daughters, it is about four sisters, one of whom passes away. So you're talking about loss and grief, and that's a big component in the book. And right now we're in a pandemic. A lot of young adults are experiencing loss and grief, whether that's personally by losing somebody because of COVID or economic reasons, or they can't go to school and have what they have come to expect as their normal life. Why is it really important for YA books right now to kind of connect with readers on those aspects?
Well, I mean, I guess what I tried to do with Tigers Not Daughters. So yeah, there's three sisters, and the novel is told through 4 points of view, but each sister has their own third person narrative. And so I wanted to explore different ways that I felt like grief manifested. So they all are seeking comfort, may not be the right word, but I'll use it, like comfort in different forms. So like the youngest daughter is really obsessed with like nature and finding animals in her neighborhood. And then the middle one wants to be a writer and is kind of compulsive about that. And then the now oldest, is in a really bad relationship with her oldest sister, now deceased, former boyfriend. Like she took over her older sister's boyfriend. And so none of these, I don't know, I mean, they vary in levels of like healthiness, like certainly the oldest sister, that's not like a good way of processing grief. But I guess, I was trying to show that this is not a single emotion that a person that every person's going to process the same, right? And so like that was sort of important to me, because I think maybe as you're a young person and you sort of have certain ideas about what grief is or what love is, or how you should feel based on something you've seen or heard, and that there are so many various ways to process emotion, and some are really, I don't want to say better than others, because it doesn't really, there's just like sort of just different ways of processing emotion. And I think that it's really, important for me to show variance and not be so on the nose with the emotions of my characters.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, your novel, you had to create this time traveling world with Hannah Goodheart.
Yeah.
I know Hafsah had to create a world as well. And so I'm going to ask you first, Mike, and then maybe Hafsah, you want to come into, how did you build your world from the ground up? That's a big task for any author. So how did you do it?
Well, the interesting thing is that you're kind of creating two worlds. I start with one that's very familiar. So as the story opens, Hannah is on the eve of her 13th birthday. She's just a kind of a typical, North Texas girl. And she's got her struggles. She's a little uncertain about herself. She's a little unsure about her relationships. She's going through some transition. She's just experienced loss. So there's a lot of things going on in her life. She's kind of a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, like most kids at the age of 12 or 13 are. But then she finds herself suddenly, on a alien world. And I got to say, I've heard authors talk about how hard it is to build a world from the ground up. It was so much fun for me to be able to create this world. And I carry just a simple notebook around with me everywhere I go. And so I find little bits and pieces of inspiration, and ideas and thoughts will pop into my head. And so I get them written down right away, or else, it's just a couple of hours, and I'm an old guy, so I forget easily. But yeah, I jot those things down, and I I find ways to incorporate those, because you have so many little nuances that you have to address when you're building a world. It's not just what the world looks like, but what's the government there like? What are relationships like? In the case of my characters, the alien characters are telepathic and they're metamorphs, and so what does that mean, and how does that shape how things function on that world? And interestingly enough, you're also having to address what this looks like through the eyes of a 12 or 13-year-old. So there's some challenges, but it's just so much fun to get to create a whole world, a whole race of people from the ground up.
Love that. Hafsah, can you want to explain how you did it with We Hunt the Flame?
Yeah, so let me start from the beginning. When I started writing We Hunt the Flame, it was my first fantasy. And at the time, there weren't any diverse fantasy books out there. So in my mind, it was going to be set in a Eurocentric world, and I was researching Welsh names and Welsh places and all of that. So I started writing the story. I had about 30,000 words, I think, when I was like, this is just not working. There's something wrong here. So I set it aside, and because I'm a designer, I was like, I need something visual to process. So I started sketching the world's map. And so the original story it was a question after watching The Lord of the Rings and The Hunger Games, and my sisters and I were like, what if the games were set in a fantasy world? So there's this kingdom surrounding an island. And so all these characters were like going together on this island to kill each other off for this prize. And so when I sketched that map together, it resembled the Mediterranean region quite a bit. And it was like a light bulb moment. I was like, why don't I just set it in the world of ancient Arabia, which is close. And so when I did that, one of the things that had always peeved me was when novels will claim to be Arabian or whatever, and they would mesh together South Asian culture and Arabian culture, which is just it's not right, because they're like two completely different regions of the world. And so that was one thing I wanted to get right. And the other thing was, there are so many novels out there that feature genies in a lamp or magical carpets, and all these mythologies have been like so overdone by people who aren't even from there, so it's like almost romanticized. And so those were the two things I wanted to tackle when I started putting the world together. And one of the things I wanted was, one that I noticed was in novels that are set in Eurocentric worlds, they have completely made up histories and politics and everything. So I thought, why don't I do the same thing in this world inspired by ancient Arabia? So I wanted to keep the language and the places and like the climate and the food, especially. Like, one of my goals was to make somebody drool by my food descriptions, and I actually made it work. So that's like validation there. And at the same time, I wanted to create a history that would stand on its own. And making that come to life was just, like Mike said, it's just so much fun. There are challenges, but in the end, it's your canvas and you can make whatever you want work. And so some of the questions were like, what does it smell like? What does it taste like? And like evoking all the senses is important. Mm-hmm. And having two narrators, Zafira, who is from a poor village in a snow-cursed land, and Nasir, who is a prince who hates himself, who doesn't have compassion. He's fighting to keep his compassion or like stave it off just to please his father. Having both of them stand in one area and react to the world around them is just so much fun. It also fleshes out the world, and I loved it, to the point that like I would sit and sketch out things just to see how it looked. And if there was embroidery on someone's cup, I'd just see how it would look in person. And having those sketches helped really flesh it out. And yeah, so I spent so much time with world building that when people say that it's one of their favorite things, it just pleases me so much. Especially like when the book was coming out, Barnes & Noble was like, this is a masterpiece in world building. I was just like, yes, validation.
Isn't there a map at the beginning of your book?
There is, yeah.
Did you draw that?
No, I didn't. I sketched a map and I sent it to Macmillan, and they were like, we could hire this one map designer that I had loved for years. Like I thought if I ever get published, I want him to do my map. And then they were like, we could either hire him or Virginia Allen. And I was like so in love
Beautiful.
with Virginia's work that I decided like she was the one. And she did such a great job. It's beautiful.
Oh, I love that. So I'm going to ask all three of you. I know Samantha has 3 books. Hafsah, you have 2. And then Mike, I'm sure you're working on something, or you might have something coming out. How is it writing a second book after being published, and a third book? Samantha, do you want to start? Is it harder?
Okay, so the first book feels like you write, it takes like your entire life to write it. My first book changed so much, and it went through so many different editorial rounds before I even got sent to an editor. The second book was much easier to write than the first, and is much different than the first. And but I'm always really proud of my work, but I always don't know if it has an audience. Like I always like send it to my editor sort of thinking like, is this a book? Like, is this something, you know? And so I did feel that way with All the Wind in the World. The good thing for me was that was nominated for a National Book Award. And so that was like extremely validating. So it's like, oh, I'm okay at this. Like, I'm okay, right? And so I would get like the questions that were like, you know, do you feel pressure after being sort of nominated for this award? And I was like, no, like, I don't think that I could write a book like All the Wind in the World. It's like set in far west Texas and like sort of an environmental apocalypse future. It's like really, it's like it's a Western sort of, it's just really different. And so I knew that I would not have to do that again. Like it would just be impossible. Like I didn't write a sequel or anything. And so the third one, again, I had about 90 pages of it. And again, it was on like these alternating narrators. And I sent it to my editor because I didn't know, it was like an informal sending it to the editor. Like, is this even worth finishing? Because I don't really know if it's like a story that is interesting. And then they offered to buy it in like a 2-book deal. And I was like, oh, whoa. And then my son was born and I had to like write it when he was like 2 months old. It was like crazy. So I had this really tight deadline that sort of forced me to write it. And that book ended up being really different than my second and third. So I feel like I am really lucky to have a publisher that like believes in kind of whatever I kind of want to do. And then I'm really lucky to have been, you know, nominated for this award. And Tigers Not Daughters has, I mean, it came out like when the pandemic started, so it like kind of tanked. But before it tanked, it was like, it had good reviews. So, you know, I've had I'm such a doubter. I'm so doubtful of myself, but I've been lucky to have good luck with my books, right? And so then that gives me courage to keep trying the things that I'm trying.
Mike, how are you working on something else? Do you have another book in the works?
I sure do. I started writing Hannah Goodheart, as I mentioned. I wrote it third person, and I sent it out. I gave it to friends who were very kind to take a look at it. It went through a few rounds of just kind of self-editing. I sent it, actually, it was very serendipitous how I came about finding a professional editor, wonderful editing firm in Toronto, Canada. I got to send it to her, and she went through with a fine-tooth comb, and then I started sending it out to publishers and to agents. And I was actually at the DFW Writers Con a few years ago and got to sit down and pitch it face to face. And I had some interest. Fox Press is a small press, and Samantha, I echo what you're saying. I feel so fortunate, very blessed to have a publisher who really believes in what I'm doing. And that was always one of those concerns that I had, that, you know, a publisher's going to get a hold of this and they're going to pick it apart and change it. And they're going to want me to change the characters or whatever. And I was so blessed. Fox had not at that time published a YA or a science fiction fantasy. So they really took a chance on me. And I hope that they're glad that they did that. We're working on a second book. Writing the first one was a journey because I actually wrote it twice. I wrote it third person and then I had to write it first person. So I got to experience that journey twice, which I grew so much as a writer in that process. And then working with the editor at Fox Press, Twyla Beth Lambert, such a talented editor. She pushed me, she challenged me. If I had $1 for every time I heard her say, use your verbs. So it was such a growing process for me. And so I wrote a second in the series, Hannah Goodheart and the Secret of Erebos. The manuscript is finished. It is currently in editorial review. Since then, I've written a short and I've started on a third Hannah Goodheart book. It's different, you know, as Samantha said, it's so different. You pour so much energy into that first book, and it's not that you don't give the subsequent books the same energy, but at least for me, I'm writing in a series. And so a lot of the heavy lifting's done. And you know, I already have an idea for how this series is going to arc. So it's just a matter of telling those stories and letting those characters grow. And I really, in some ways, I let the characters tell the story. So, you know, for me, it's not super difficult.
Awesome. Hafsah, you have your second book coming out in January.
Yeah.
And then, do you have anything else coming after that? And will it be another series?
I am working on another novel right now. Unlike Mike, We Free the Stars is the second book in To We Hunt the Flame, and it's the finale, sort of. And it took so much out of me that I'm finally climbing out of that second book syndrome, because the first book came out May 2019. But from April of 2019, I had been on the road traveling, like every few weeks or every couple of weeks I was somewhere. And that was my first time going and meeting people who had read my book or wanted to read my book. And it was like a different mindset, because like you're suddenly public and then you have to go inside and go into your head and get back to writing. And I just couldn't write because of the travel, and because like suddenly people were reading my book and then there are reviews, and then when it's your first book, it's kind of like you're writing in a vacuum, right? You just finish trying to get the book done. That's all. You just need to reach the finish line, and then you need to perfect it to send to agents, because you need one yes. But with your second book, you know that you have to please your agent, your editors, your whole publishing team, and you need to please critics like Kirkus, who you didn't have to worry about before you were writing. And you have to please all these people, and it just became so hard to write that I guess I had to ask for extensions, and then deadlines got pushed back, and it's finally done, and it's like it took so much out of me that I am very proud of how it turned out. But it did take an even longer while for me to like climb out of that hole that it put me in order to write again. But and I felt like it was impossible, but I'm finally getting there. So I'm in the beginning stages of a new manuscript, codenamed Guns and Tea, that I've been sharing a little bit here and there. Yeah, but I like it.
Kirkus has only starred my third book, and I was like, finally, you jerks. Like,
seriously?
Yes.
Not even for the second one?
No, the second one, the Kirkus was the worst review for the second one.
Oh.
They said something like, they can get real sassy, Kirkus.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it was like, doesn't work. I mean, it was like something real like that, dismissive. And then so by the time they started the third one, I was like, fine. Like, thanks.
I'm still in the being ignored stage.
Well, I didn't even know what this is really embarrassing, but when my book came out, I got a starred Kirkus review, and I didn't know really what that was. Like, I wasn't really aware of Kirkus, and I was like, oh, I got this review, and everyone was like, do you know that's a big deal? And I was like, oh, shoot, now that's pressure. Thanks.
I wasn't worried about it, worried about Kirkus at all, because I didn't really understand the significance of them. But once I had gotten the first starred one and I was happy about it, my editor was like, now we've got to wait for Kirkus. And I was like, okay. And the review wasn't scathing, but it was not a star. But yeah, they can be a little sassy in their reviews.
Yeah. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes. I want to open up for questions from the audience. If you want to hit the raise hand button, I will unmute you, or you can unmute yourself once I call on you.
Or they can type in the chat, right?
Or type in the chat, whatever you feel comfortable doing. Let's see.
I can talk about why I'm reading Lonesome Dove. Does anybody want to know this? So
Oh
it's
wait, we have a raised
Oh,
hand.
damn. Okay. Someone immediately was like, no, we don't want to hear that.
Okay, Debbie, if you are able to unmute yourself, I think it's not letting me.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, great. I have a question for Mike, because you were saying that your book borders middle grade and young adult. The book that I wrote I thought was young adult, my hero is a 13-year-old girl, but she's experiencing some, her setting is in high school, and the subject matter is more young adult than it's middle grade. So what I ran into when I talked to agents is they didn't know where to put it, so they weren't interested in it. So did you deal with that issue? And if so, what was your solution? What was your workaround on that one?
That was some feedback certainly that I had gotten as I submitted this to agents and publishers, at least the ones that were kind enough to send me feedback. So often you just get ignored. But yeah, that was some of the feedback that I received. And honestly, I didn't try to work around it. I told the story that I wanted to tell. In my case, the characters are at that 13-year age, and the book reads very family friendly. And I wanted to write something that families could read together. I have memories that, I think back of reading Tom Sawyer, for instance, with my grandfather. My grandfather was born blind. And so he had a copy in fact, it's on my shelf back here, from 1923, a copy of Tom Sawyer. And I found it and read it to him. And that's such a memory for me, reading with my grandfather. So I wanted to write something that the parents could read with their children, those teen and preteen kids. So I didn't try to work around it. I just told the story that I wanted to tell. As we were going through the process of editing it, it was conversation that we had that we were going to shelve it YA. But that, a lot of reviewers, might consider it middle grade, and I was fine with that. They're fine with that. I didn't work around it.
Okay, thanks.
If I can chime in too, when I was creating We Had the Flame, I had quite a few agents who were like, this is more adult. Would you consider being a crossover novel? And the thing about crossovers is that it's so hard to shelve them and hard to sell them. So I was like, no, I needed to stay YA. And though I did lower the ages of the characters, I didn't change the content in the book. So it's more like you don't want to sign with anyone who's going to change the book, go away from your vision of it. So it's just finding the right person. There are people who will love the novel despite the age or despite what they think the content is. So good luck.
Thanks.
Yeah, let me just add to that and say my first editor, when I went through that first editing process before I I got published, that first editor had recommended that I age the characters up to about that 16-year range. And I did that based on her recommendation. But interestingly enough, when Fox accepted it, they recommended that I age them down to 13, not knowing that that was the original age that I had them. And so I had a laugh. And as I wrote the second iteration of the manuscript, I aged them back down to 13.
Love that. Janie, if you would like to ask your question.
Sure. I was just going to ask if you guys were full-time authors, or if you had another job on the side, or if maybe you used to be, you used to have another job and now you've switched to full-time writers.
Samantha, do you want to start?
Yeah, I am not a full-time writer. I teach at SMU. I am an English teacher. I teach first-year writing. I have done that for since I was out of graduate school. So, I mean, not to get too specific, and like everybody has different kinds of advances, but like I could not live off of the money that is given to me, even though the checks at the time seemed like the biggest, most exciting thing that has ever happened. If you're sort of expecting those checks come really rarely.
They get broken apart.
They get broken apart, and then you get taxed, and then
some goes to your agent, and
some goes to your agent, and so it has helped me out in lots of ways. I paid off my student loans, which would still be there, but I feel like I am not close. Like something would have to happen really huge. Like I would have to like have a big blockbuster movie or something, like something would have to happen really big in order for me to move into full-time writing.
What university did you say?
I teach at SMU, Southern Methodist University. It's in Dallas.
Cool.
Hafsah, are you full-time?
I am a full-time writer and a full-time business owner, and 2-hour sleeper.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh yes. So yeah, no, this is interesting. So yes, I work from 5 to 7 in the morning. That's when I write, because that's my toddler gets up at 7, and then I have to go to work, and then I am tired. And so I go to sleep at 8:30, and I try to get up again at 5 and knock out as many words as I can. So when she's full-time writer, yes, I write probably every day, but I don't, it's not my income.
Mike, what about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. And let me say that there is a very small percentage of authors out there who that's all they do. It's a very small percent. I didn't go into this to make big bucks. I'm the lead pastor of Collin Creek Church in Plano, Texas. That's my full-time gig, and then I write full-time on the side, and I'm a podcaster, and so it's busy, and I sleep very little.
Yeah, and for me, I don't know if you're curious, I'll just jump in too. I'm not a full-time author, but I am a full-time writer. So my other job is freelance writing for magazines and websites and everything under the sun, anthologies, things like that. So I'm always writing, but my books don't make me a full-time income.
Okay.
Thank you. Ashley?
I was interested in Samantha's answer about why you're reading Lonesome Dove again. That's actually on my list for when the weather turns cold.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so I had tried to read Lonesome Dove because my husband told me that it was his favorite book ever, and he read it really quickly. But this was a long time ago. But I got to page 30, and they were eating beans for several pages. And I was like, this is not a book. I don't understand how this is some kind of adventure story. And so I put it away for a really long time. But I had the sense that what I wanted to do with my next book is write a true Western. So All the Wind in the World is kind of a Western, although people say it's not. Reviewers are well, she says it's a Western, it's not. And I'm like, come on. So I wanted to write like a real true Western, but I was having a hard time with it, and just generally kind of historical details. I could do setting, blah, blah. And so I was like, well, I'll just pick up like the most like quintessential Western, which is Lonesome Dove. And then I was like reading it thinking, this is very stupid because this book is like the best Western. And then why would you try to like write another Western after reading this other? Like it's actually, it's so, they haven't really started doing anything yet. I've moved past the bean eating scene, but it's written in third person from like, I don't know, 20 different characters, and it's not cut up by chapter. It's like cut up by paragraph, and then it just goes into another character's like internal third person. I'm like, how is this even possible? It is just so like well done that way that it just got very intimidating. And so I'm not going to write this Western anymore, but I'm going to write something else, I think, that like inspired me to like stop trying to write this Western. It's like not working, and move on. So, but it's also just like a really great teacher in characterization and style, because of that narrative style, which seems just like impossible. Like it's hard enough to get into, you know, one character sort of motivations, but this is, I mean, it's just like all over the place with these characters. Like, how do you do that? And it's really pretty wonderful.
Mike, I think I saw like a hand wave for you. Okay, did you have a question?
No.
Oh, no, other Mike.
Oh, there's another Mike.
Yes, there's two of us. So I know some of y'all were traditionally published. Would you all recommend today even still traditionally publishing over self-publishing, and why?
Who wants to go first?
I actually did try the self-publishing route. It requires you to do a lot of work on your own. I mean, traditional publishing does as well. Like I ran a whole pre-order campaign myself, but both have its benefits. I guess there's just a lot of work involved with self-publishing. But it depends on like what you want to do. Like, do you want to go the traditional route? What matters to you most? Like, is it having full control? Because when you're traditionally publishing, you rarely have control over so many things, like the cover, where your books get sold, all of that. There's so much that you can't control. So yeah, it depends on its personal preference mostly.
Yeah, also like if you're good at that, like marketing, publicity, if you're like a business oriented person, which I am not, like I would just really prefer to like be in a dark room and type. And so I'm okay with letting other people take those jobs because I cannot do them. I do not want to figure out how to do them. I do not want to learn enough, like what Hafsah does with like graphic design, to make my own cover, or like hire, you know. And so I have no inclination towards the business side of writing. And so I am okay with, taking an advance and then, letting a lot of control go into the hands of others. Whereas in self-publishing, I'm sure it's different, but you don't take an advance, right? Because you're not the publisher, but you get money on the sales end, but then you have to work real hard for those sales. And if you're good at that, then you're good at that.
I think Hafsah's right. I think it really depends, Mike, on what your goals are. I think that's probably the big question. Rather than ask the question, should I go the route of self-publishing or should I go the traditional route? I think that first question probably needs to be, what are your goals? The second question probably would have to do with your desire to control the book itself. I think the answer to those two questions can probably help inform what route you want to take. I will say that the landscape is changing in the publishing world. It's becoming a little more friendly to small presses and indie authors, but it's kind of tough out there and still. So I think you answer those two questions and then go from there.
Can I Can
Oh,
I
sorry.
share an anecdote that Kathleen Kent shared?
Mhm.
Kathleen Kent is a local author. She wrote historical fiction for years, New York Times bestseller, and then she's writing this Detective Betty, what's going to be a trilogy. So now she's Edgar nominated, but so she publishes with Mulholland, which is an imprint of Little Brown, which is a big publisher. And she said they publish crime fiction, and she said some of her pub mates, on that imprint, were actually handing their advances back, and they were self-publishing only because they had an established audience. But sometimes traditional publishing, at least what Kathleen told me, is that it can take a year and a half to see your book come out, or in some cases 2, which is why these authors were giving their advance back, because they wanted the more immediate kind of result of publishing their own work to kind of a built-in audience. But I don't think they would have made that decision unless they were already, maybe had a name behind them. But I thought that was interesting.
But like, who can edit their own book? Like, is that possible? Who do you?
Well, you can hire somebody.
You can, you can hire.
Yes, I know.
I will say small publishers might be kind of like a middle ground between self-publishing and like the larger presses, because you do have a lot more control. Usually they're a little bit more open-minded. They'll publish stuff that is, I hate saying this word, but it was said to me all the time, maybe not mainstream yet. They're a little bit more open to experimentation. But they do help you get all the connections that you need. They can still connect you to Kirkus and all the magazines and all the events that you'd like to go to. So that might be an option. Okay, so before we go, I'm going to ask you one more question.
I see Miriam has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Miriam. How about you ask the last question?
It's all right. I typed it. I'll just say it. I wrote 2 questions, one for Hafsah and then one for everyone, but like, just answer whichever you want. Maybe the one for everyone, I guess.
Oh,
here we go.
I'm sorry. I'm just really wordy. It's not actually a big question.
I can't see the question.
Oh, in the chat. I can read the everyone question. It's at the bottom. But Hafsah, you can read yours.
I'm trying. Oh, okay, I see it. Okay, so was that shift from a Eurocentric land to an Arabian one difficult? So yeah, I mean, there were 2 parts to that. One was that I didn't want to write anything that I didn't feel proud of, that I didn't feel like I could stand behind, and I didn't want to just write something just so that I could fit into the norms. I knew that it would make it difficult because, well, I dress differently, and then this content is also going to be a bit different than your typical fantasy. But I thought that if I can't do what I want, and if I can't stand behind like my desires and what my heart is telling me to, then I don't really want to be published. So that was something that I really stood behind, and I wanted to make sure it stayed. Like, so even if an editor or an agent was like, why don't you edit this out? Why don't you scale back on that? I would stand behind it because it was important to me. And when something's important to you, you try your best to make it happen. And that was basically what I did. Like, I just persevered until I finished that novel. And when I did, there were tons of agents who wanted it, and then editors also did. So it works out if you stand behind it, I feel like. Mm-hmm. And the question to everyone.
How do you feel about compromises in your books? When should we and when shouldn't we compromise?
Do you mean like compromise with like our editor or something? Like we feel strongly about something and then I feel like I'm not asked to compromise very much, especially not anymore. I usually, my editor will ask me a question about why I have made a decision. And if I can justify it, then they will let me keep it. But if I find that I'm just like, because I like it, then then it doesn't do anything to the story, right? So like if they're trying to make this like an element of the story better, like the plot, then typically I will be like, oh yes, I get it, right? But like sometimes there's Spanish in my books, right? And sometimes they would be like, you need to say what it is. It's called code switching, right? So if you'll be like, look at that maguey, the cactus, right? Like double naming something. And I'm like, no. Like it's called context clues. I'm like, don't insult the people, by like making that sort of, and they'll be like, okay. And so then you guys kind of like, and in that sense, I'm the authority, right? Like I am the authority when it comes to like writing a story about the Mexican American family. So like, don't tread on that. Like that's how people talk, So if I can justify it, then I can usually include it. But again, if I'm stumbling over it, or if it's a hard question why they're asking me why something is, then maybe I can bend a little bit.
Yeah, and a good editor won't make you compromise on something. When you're starting off and you've just sold to that editor, you have to have those conversations, and they'll ask you questions, and then sometimes they will say, why don't you change this? And usually the question is, usually they'll say that this isn't working and you just need to find the solution. Sometimes they'll give you a solution that isn't the right one, and you need to work with it just to answer that question. That was basically what it was for me, in quite a few places in the novel. And usually the editor is right, but of course it depends on the question.
Yeah, compromise is such a broad term. I probably need to know really specifically what kind of compromises maybe you're talking about. But when it comes to the characters or the overall story, they're the characters I wrote. It's the story I'm telling, and it's the world that I'm putting it in. So those are kind of non-negotiable for me. And as I mentioned earlier in this discussion, that was a fear that I had handing this over to publishers, is what are they going to ask me to change? What compromises are they going to ask me to make? Now, as I went through the editing process, especially with Twyla Beth, I mean, there were along the way a lot of constructive criticisms that she had, and it really was a trust relationship that she and I built, that we were both on the same page. And I understood that when she is recommending something that, and let me be clear, that doesn't change the characters, it doesn't change the world, it doesn't change the story, but maybe it clarifies the plot, or it shores up a scene, or maybe it leaves the end of a chapter in a certain place, maybe that I didn't necessarily originally intend. I understood that all the while that her goal was the same as mine, and that is that the finished product was the very best story it could be. And I'm just really blessed and really thankful to have a publisher that was just 100% on board with that.
Blake and I have talked before about how, like, I was telling him that I always look for problems, like when I'm looking at students, I sometimes, like, I've taught for Blake, and so I've done a novel revision class, and I'm always like, what's the problem? There's a problem, and we find the problem. What's the problem? And so I sometimes, I try to reach a point where the writing is not so precious to me, and I think of it as like a math equation, and we're trying to solve for X. And it's like, what is the problem, the story, And so sometimes I do have to step back from little things that I think were just like absolutely necessary, because it doesn't work. It's not in service to the novel.
I will say, if there is something in your gut that doesn't feel right that a publisher is telling you to do, it's okay to speak up. Like, don't be afraid to speak up. And if you have a literary agent, they should have your back too. Yeah. With my first book, the publisher wanted a horrendous cover, and it was bad. So I talked to them, and they said, well, you have to go to the head of the publishing company, which it's a small press. So I had access to him, and I had to have a conversation. And I was like, look, marketing wise, this isn't going to work. I don't know what you're giving me. I can't.
Wow.
And he took what I said and we made compromises and worked together to find something that was way better. So you can do that with small presses, maybe a little bit more than you could with like large presses.
Yeah, well, my book came out through Macmillan, and so my cover, the one that they printed on the ARC, was nice, but it was more typography based, and so it didn't really give you insight as to what the book's about. So I told them, like, we need a new one, and you listen to me because I'm a designer. And then they were like, no, we've done all that we can and we've paid the designers already, so we can't. But then when they tried to sell it, tried to get it stocked at Barnes & Noble, they were like, we can't take this because you can't really tell what the book's about. So then they were like, you're right, we're going to do the cover again. So yeah, it worked out.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, and your current cover is stunning, by the way.
Yeah, looks great.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so, yeah, it's beautiful.
Yay. Well, I really appreciate having you, Mike, Samantha, and Hafsah. Thank you so much for being here and chatting about the young adult genre, and everybody for your wonderful questions. I look forward to us having another Lit Talk before the end of the year. So stay tuned. And I included everybody's link to their books in the chat. So if you would like to go to Interabang and check out their books, leave reviews, support your local authors and your local bookstores. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Y'all too. Bye.
Bye.